Hello my dear student, welcome back to the online classes. So today I'll go with English literature. In previous class we discussed about the forms of English literature. Today we'll go with the background study of English literature, how English literature has begun, right? So let's start a topic. So already you know that's what's mean by the English literature. Today we'll go with the background study, means how it's a begin. So in previous class we studied these are the forms of English literature. Now we'll go with the how English literature has begun. This article is focused on English language literature rather than the literature of England. It's rather than the literature of England overall. That's the whole English literature. This is what now I am focusing on, that the whole English literature, not only the England English literature, so that it includes writers from Scotland. So from the way I am going to point in the writers in that English literature: Scotland, Wales, the Crown dependencies, and the whole of Ireland. The whole of Ireland, as well as literature in English from countries of the former British Empire. So from the British Empire, this is what literature we are going to studying, right? Including the United States, not only the British Empire literature we are going to study, including the United States, right? American literature, so British literature, Indian literature, right? We have to study. Now just we are going to focusing on that what the specific syllabus we got, right? For this first semester of BA from Gulbarga University, we are just studying about that, but I am going to explaining now the background history of English literature, right? However, until the early 19th century, in that early 19th century, it only deals with the literature of United Kingdom. In the 19th century, early 19th century, it just deals with the United Kingdom's literature, not only the whole literature. 19ನೇ ಶತಮಾನದಲ್ಲಿ means early 19th century means 19ನೇ ಶತಮಾನದ ಉಗಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೇವಲ ಯಾವ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಅಂತಂದರೆ ಯುನೈಟೆಡ್ ಕಿಂಗ್ಡಮ್ UKದು ಏನಿರ್ತದಲ್ಲ ಸಾಹಿತ್ಯವನ್ನು ಮಾತ್ರ ಫೋಕಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು 19ನೇ ಶತಮಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ಉಗಮದ ಟೈಮ್ನಲ್ಲಿ. ಸೊ ಆನ್ ದ ಟೈಮ್ ಆಫ್ 19th century the only deals with the literature of the United Kingdom, the Crown dependencies and Ireland. These are the three major countries literature which begins in the time of the early 19th century. These three United Kingdom, Crown dependencies and islands. So except these, ಇದನ್ನು ಹೊರತುಪಡಿಸಿ next ಕೂಡ before the 19th century if we go on, so that's we can found that background literature in the time of Anglo-Saxon period. So it's not specifically we are going to findings to the where, so specifically for Indian literature as a famous, not a British, not England, so we are not going to be pointing that in the time of Anglo-Saxon period, right? So it does not include literature written in the other languages of Britain. So maybe the oral form, not only the written form. So why it's started the before 19th century, if we are going to become knowing about literature, on the time of Geoffrey Chaucer was the father of English literature. It's depends on the time how that's literature and focus, right? So in a time of Elizabethan, that literature focused on the dramas. They specifically focused on dramas. So before of Elizabethan time, literature focused on poetries, right? So sometimes that's literature focused on poetry. Sometimes means some periods literature focused on the drama. Some periods novel, right? These are about the time. Means a period. It's different times in a different literature, types of literature on focusing the different times we can get in that way. The English language has developed over the course of more than 1400 years. More than 1400 years. So this is what the English language developed, that's over the course of more than 1400 years. The earliest form of English, a set of Anglo-Frisian, that's in the time of Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-Frisian. Dialects are brought to Great Britain by Anglo-Saxon, right? So which got the Great Britain Anglo-Saxon period. Settlers in the fifth century are called, the time of 5th century are called Old English. So which is the 5th century Anglo-Saxon period, also known as Old English, or the 5th century also known as Old English. Beowulf is the most famous work in Old English. In Old English, which is the most famous work. Beowulf, it's a most famous work in the time of Old English. Old English means in the 5th century. 5ನೇ ಶತಮಾನದಲ್ಲಿ. So in the 5th century we call as Old English or Anglo-Saxon period, right? And has achieved a national epic status, which is that the Beowulf, which is the work, has achieved as a national epic, right? This work also known as the national epic status in England. Where in England it's also known as the national epic, right? Despite being set in a Scandinavian war, however, following the Norman conquest of England in 1066. In the time of 1066, there is a Norman conquest. In this England, the Norman conquest, the written form of the Anglo-Saxon language became a less common. So which is the written form in the time of Anglo-Saxon period? It's a less common at the time of Norman conquest in England. So the Anglo-Saxon written forms are less common. Under the influence of the new aristocracy, under the influence of new aristocracy, French became the standard language. Not English, it's the standard language. On the time of new aristocracy, the French, which is a language, become a standard language. The French language has become a standard language in the time of aristocracy. aristocracy. So French language, it is become a what? Standard language, right? The French language has become a standard language in the time of aristocracy of the court. In the court of law, that's become a standard language in the time of aristocracy. Where it's become a standard language? ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡರ್ಡ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಆಗಿತ್ತು? The court, parliament and polite society. So this is what a French language has become a standard language, not the English. It's become a standard language in the time of new aristocracy. The English spoken after the Normans came is known as a Middle English. After the Normans means that's Norman conquest. The Norman, it's a type of a society who came and they started spoken of English at the time which we considering as a Middle English, right? This form of English lasted until 1470s, when the Chancery Standard, late Middle English means when the Middle English is going to become ending, that is considering as a late Middle English. In the time of Chancery Standard means a late Middle English, a London-based form of English became whispered. The London-based form of English became whispered. Geoffrey Chaucer in 1343 to 1400, it is what the time of a Geoffrey Chaucer, means period of a Geoffrey Chaucer, author of the Canterbury Tales. The most famous work of a Geoffrey Chaucer, that is what? The Canterbury Tales, right? The most famous work of the Geoffrey Chaucer. This is what the Canterbury Tales. So Geoffrey Chaucer is known as a father of English literature. The Canterbury Tales was a significant figure in the development of the Canterbury Tales was a significant figure in the development of the legitimacy of vernacular Middle English at a time when the dominant literary language in England were still French and Latin. In England, French and Latin both are the dominant languages. Up to the come of that's a period of Geoffrey Chaucer's, the French and Latins were a dominant language in that England. The invention of the printing press, so printing press which invented by whom? Johannes Gutenberg in the period of in 1439. Printing press it's an invention by the printing press, by the invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in 1439 also helped to standardize the language. So the printing press helped us to standardize the language, as did the King James Bible in 1613. This is what the printing press makes to the language standardize, that's the English language, in the time of 1613, that is the King James work, Bible. King James Bible that makes to the language of English become standard. And the great oval shaped that work, that Bible, it's make the language become a standard. The English language spread throughout the world with the development of the British Empire between the late 16th and early 18th century. The English language spread throughout the world. Throughout the world, it's just spreaded to development. That's the language English spread throughout the world for the development of a British Empire. For the what purpose English language spreaded? To develop the British Empire, not to the language. Where the British Empire developed, there the British language English also developed. ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷ್ ತನ್ನ ಸಾಮ್ರಾಜ್ಯವನ್ನು ವಿಸ್ತರಣೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತದೋ ಅಲ್ಲೆಲ್ಲ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಭಾಷೆಯನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಉಳಿಸಿ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತದೆ. ಸೊ ವೇರ್ ದೇ ಡೆವಲಪ್ಡ್ ದೇರ್ ದ ಬ್ರಿಟಿಷ್ ಎಂಪೈರ್, ದೇ ಲೆಫ್ಟ್ ದ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್. So that's developing automatically. Between the late century of 16th and 18th. So in the 16th century, in between the 16th and 18th century, the language of English developed. And the time of British Empire, where they started to rule some places, including the India also, right? And its height, it was the largest empire in history. In history, which is the largest empire, English means a British Empire. It's the largest empire. So everywhere they started to ruling. So that's become a largest empire. Then they left their language for the sake of communication, or for the sake of leading or ruling empires. They left their languages. Then the English language automatically developed by the ruling of British Empire. Right? Which is the largest empire? The British Empire is the largest empire in history. Right? By 1913, the British Empire held sway over 12 million people, means 23% of the world population at the time during the 19th and 20th century. 19th and 20th century, in the time of 19th and 20th century, in the whole world, 23% of the people, or the population of 23%, in the time of 19th and 20th century, these colonies and the USA started to produce their own significant literary traditions in English. In the language of English, USA and some other colonies started to they just want to specific work. They have to give a particular their specific work in the language of English, which is growing more than speed of French and Britain. So that's more than speed of French language, it spread all over the world. Here the 23% of the population in the world spoken, that's English language. They started speaking the English language, more than 23% of the population in the world. And in the last 100 plus years, numerous writers from Great Britain, the islands of Ireland, the USA, and members of the other famous British colonies have received the Nobel Prize for work in the English language. So, some writers who received the Nobel Prize, right? That's a Nobel Prize. Here, some authors received for the specific work in the language of English, right? So, who received here? Numerous writers. So, who is here? The numerous writers from Great Britain, the islands of Ireland's island, okay, who belongs to the Ireland's island, and the USA, and member of the famous British colonies. British colonies means where the British is ruling, where the British Empire is ruling. British colonies have received the Nobel Prize in specific language of English. In the English language only, they received the what? Nobel Prize, the greatest prize in the world. It is in the what? In the language of English. Poet and playwright, that's William Shakespeare. His time means a period of 1564 to 1616. Is a widely regarded as a greatest writer in the English language and one of the world's greatest dramatists. His plays have been translated into every major living languages and are performed more often than those of any other playwright, right? So, the father of English drama, world's greatest dramatist, we called him, right? And also the father of English dramas, who? William Shakespeare. His works means William Shakespeare's work. His plays means works. Dramas also known as a plays. His plays have been translated. So, in some other language, we are going to translate things to the whose William Shakespeare's work. Translated into every major language living. So, every major languages means our major languages or our national language, Hindi. Right? In Hindi also we translated that William Shakespeare's work. Major languages in the world and the performed more often than those of any other playwright. So, his work also performed. In the other languages also performed. Right? In the 19th century, Sir Walter Scott's historical romance of Sir Walter Scott's, those works inspired to whom? For the next generation of painters, to the whom? Painters, composers and writers throughout the empires of Europe. throughout the Europe, that Sir Walter Scott's work, historical Romans work, inspired for the generation of painters, composers and writers. His works also inspires to them, right? Today we are going to end here. So we'll continue to the next remaining part for the next class. We'll go for the works of authors, the major works of the authors in the next class or next part. Today we'll end here today's class. I request to you subscribe the channel and follow it and share it to your friend. This is what the information can be helpful for them, right? Today we will end here only. Thank you for the today's session. Jai Hind.